In 2023, a cargo ship captain named Luis Hernández pulled his vessel into a holding queue off the Pacific coast of Panama and waited. 18 days. His ship was carrying auto parts for factories in Ohio that had already halted their assembly lines. Every day he sat in that queue cost his employer roughly $50,000 in delayed contracts. He wasn't alone. At peak congestion, over 160 ships were anchored in the same queue, stretching across the horizon like a traffic jam on water. The reason? Panama had run out of rain. Here's the thing about the Panama Canal that nobody tells you in school. It doesn't run on salt water. It runs on a lake. Every time a ship passes through, that lake drains a little. One ship transit swallows between 55 and 125 million gallons of fresh water, which then gets flushed straight into the ocean. In a normal year, rainfall refills the lake. But 2023 was not a normal year. Rainfall dropped 70% below historical averages. The lake shrank. Ships got heavier than the water could hold, and the most important trade route on Earth started shutting down, one restriction at a time. The canal went from processing 36 ships a day down to 18. That is not a delay, that is a collapse. About $270 billion worth of goods moves through the Panama Canal every year. 5 to 6% of all global maritime trade, 40% of every container headed to the United States. When that pipe narrows, the entire global supply chain feels it within weeks. Shipping costs spiked. The Asia to US East Coast route jumped 25% overnight. Companies rerouting around the southern tip of South America were burning an extra $1 million in fuel per voyage and adding 2 full weeks to their journey. Car factories shut down because a single missing part, one crate on one delayed ship, can stop an entire production line. And here is where it gets interesting. While cargo captains were aging in those queues, governments across Latin America looked at the chaos and saw something else entirely. An opportunity. Within months, 5 countries quietly accelerated plans to build their own version of what Panama has. Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, all of them pitching what the industry calls a dry canal. No water locks, no lake, no rainfall dependency. Just rail lines, modern ports, and a fast overland crossing from one ocean to the other. The race to capture $270 billion had officially started. But before we get into who is actually winning that race, you need to understand what happened inside Panama itself. Because the story of the drought is only half of it. The other half is what happened to the money. Here is something that will genuinely confuse you. Despite processing far fewer ships, the Panama Canal made more money during the drought than it ever had before. In fiscal 2024, revenues hit nearly $5 billion. Profits climbed 8%. How? When supply drops and demand stays constant, prices explode. The Canal Authority turned scarcity into a product. They ran an open auction for transit slots. Desperate shipping companies, calculating the cost of sitting idle versus the cost of bidding, started throwing money at the problem. Standard transit for a large container ship was already running $840,000. Auction premiums on top of that pushed some slots past $1 million. In one extreme case, a company carrying time-sensitive fuel cargo paid $4 million for a single transit slot, just to skip the line. One crossing. The Canal Authority then formalized this system. They started selling yearly slot packages to major shipping conglomerates, companies that could afford to lock in millions of dollars up front just to guarantee access. Smaller operators got priced out entirely. The canal had quietly transformed from a public utility into something closer to a private members club for freight. Panama knows this is not sustainable. If the route stays expensive and unpredictable long enough, the world's biggest shipping companies will permanently reroute their supply chains. When that happens, no auction price saves you. So they are betting $1.6 billion on a dam. The plan is to build a massive reservoir on a river called the Rio Indio, connect it underground to the existing lake system, and pump enough extra water in to support 11 additional daily transits. American engineering teams reviewed the proposal and confirmed it is the only viable long-term fix. Construction starts in 2027, completion around 2031. There is one problem. The reservoir requires flooding 4,600 hectares of farmland and forcing somewhere between 2,500 and 12,000 rural families off land their grandparents worked. Those communities are furious. In June 2026, protesters shut down the main highway connecting Panama City to Colón. They are not stopping. Panama is in a race against its own infrastructure and its own people at the same time. While Panama scrambles, Mexico has already moved. The interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, they call it the CIIT, is the most serious challenger the Panama Canal has ever faced. The concept is simple. Mexico narrows to about 300 kilometers at its southern end. Build a rail line across that stretch. Modernize the ports on both coasts, and you have an ocean-to-ocean crossing that doesn't care whether it rained last month. The Mexican government has spent roughly $5 billion building this out. The core rail line, 303 kilometers connecting the Pacific port of Salina Cruz to the Gulf Coast port of Coatzacoalcos, is already running. Supporting lines connect the corridor to the rest of Mexico's freight network and extends south toward Guatemala. Now here is where it stops being theoretical. In the spring of 2025, Hyundai ran a full commercial test through the corridor. A car carrier docked at Salina Cruz carrying 900 South Korean vehicles. Workers unloaded them, loaded them onto freight wagons, sent them across the isthmus in 9 hours, and reloaded them onto a second ship on the Gulf side. The entire ocean-to-ocean transfer took 72 hours and cut 5 days off the Panama Canal route. Total logistics costs dropped 15%. That number, 15% cheaper and 5 days faster, is the number that keeps Panama executives awake at night. But Mexico is not just building a faster road. They are building an entirely different economic model. Along the rail corridor, the Mexican government is developing 14 industrial zones. Tax-incentivized manufacturing hubs targeting semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, auto parts, and clean energy equipment. The logic is elegant. Raw materials arrive from Asia on the Pacific side, get processed inside these industrial parks, and the finished goods roll straight out onto the Gulf Coast for final delivery to the US. Mexico is not just trying to move cargo, it is trying to own the step where the value actually gets created. 8 of these industrial zones already have major private operators signed on. By the time the full corridor reaches complete capacity in 2026, Mexico will have built something Panama structurally cannot compete with, a transit route that also manufactures. Now, Nicaragua. This one requires a different kind of attention. In late 2024, Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega stood up at a trade summit and announced a canal, a real water canal, cutting 445 kilometers across the entire country, 27 meters deep, wide enough for the largest ships in the world. Price tag $64.5 billion. For context, that is more than 3 times Nicaragua's entire annual economy. The company backing it is a Chinese state-linked engineering firm called CAMC Engineering. Every serious economist who looked at the numbers said the same thing. This canal will never be built. The debt burden alone would require transit fees so high that no rational shipping company would use it. The route is nearly 3 times longer than Panama. Two-way traffic for massive vessels across 445 kilometers is operationally close to impossible. The sovereign risk of parking a $64.5 billion immovable asset in a country run by an authoritarian regime with no independent courts is simply too high. So why is China building it? Because the canal is not the point. Alongside the canal studies, that same Chinese firm is spending $517 million upgrading an airport near Managua, not a passenger airport, a facility with a Soviet-era runway specifically built for heavy long-range military aircraft. They are covering 80% of the financing, meaning Nicaragua is now financially dependent on Beijing. They are also building deep water port capacity on both coasts, coastal highways and rail connections. Through the cover story of a $64.5 billion canal that will never get dug, China is methodically establishing a permanent logistics and military footprint hours from the southern US border. Whether or not the first shovel of that trench ever moves, Beijing has already won what it was actually after. Colombia, Costa Rica, and Honduras are all in the race too. Colombia's proposal runs 198 kilometers through some of the densest rainforest on the continent. Because the ecology is so protected, most of the line would have to be built as deep tunnels and elevated bridges through the mountains, keeping the terrain underneath intact. Beautiful engineering concept. Realistic completion date, 2050, maybe. Costa Rica is pitching a 315-kilometer highway and rail corridor, targeting the very largest container ships, ones too big for Panama's locks entirely. The route would carve straight through national parks and protected wetland. In a country whose entire international brand is built around conservation, the political resistance is severe enough that most analysts consider it dead on arrival. Honduras has a more modest $18 billion version. The problem is, Honduras does not have $18 billion and is struggling to attract private investors willing to park that kind of capital in one of Central America's most economically fragile governments. Here is what actually drives the economics of all of these proposals, because it is not obvious. When a ship docks at a Pacific port and unloads onto rail, cargo handlers can take 3 standard 40-foot international shipping containers and consolidate their contents into 2 larger 53-foot domestic rail cars. That alone cuts overland transport costs by roughly a third. On top of that, the shipping company gets its empty containers back immediately, sending them straight to Asia for reloading, instead of dragging them empty across a continent. That saves weeks and significant money. When you do that math against a Panama Canal transit that now costs anywhere from $840,000 to $4 million, depending on whether you need to bid at auction, the overland route stops being the inconvenient option. It starts being the rational one. The Panama Canal is not going away. It will keep processing ships. The wealthy conglomerates that can afford the premium will keep using it. The Rio Indio Dam might eventually solve the water problem. But the era where Panama had a complete monopoly on moving goods between the Atlantic and Pacific, that era is ending. The world is quietly rewiring itself. The $270 billion is still moving. It is just finding new roads. And the country that builds the fastest, cheapest road gets to collect the toll. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next adventure.